I'm glad that each of you are here today. My name is Matt. I'm one of the pastors here at CrossPoint, and I'm super excited to be sharing this Sunday morning with you. We're in week 2 of our series called Shattered. And in this series, we've been really highlighting the idea that your life is a reflection of the thoughts that you think. And so it's really important for us as Christian believers, as those who want to serve the Lord and follow after him in a very Christ-like manner, for us to pay attention to what's going on up here and the thoughts that we're thinking, because they're so important. And then also this idea that sometimes we just have these strongholds that build up in our lives, these unhelpful thoughts, sometimes these sins or these different things that become so big that they just have to be shattered, and there's no other way for them to be shattered but through the power of Jesus Christ. When Pastor Sean first said that we were going to be talking about the mind, I was like, yes, I'm so excited to talk about the mind, because I just love this topic and I love this conversation. I've always been a really big fan of theology and philosophy and psychology, and so I've just really loved studying all the different theories that are out there. They're like endless, right? They just go on and on. And so, and one of the theories that I used to really think about and really enjoy was this thinker named Immanuel Kant. And Kant theorized that as human beings, we make a lot of decisions based on logic. And he would say that even though we are impulsive sometimes, even that impulse, that thing that doesn't make a whole lot of sense, is a logical thing, because we're reasoning in our minds all the time, and that's what we use to make decisions. Everything is based on logic. And I think that there's a lot of merit to that. I actually still really enjoy that thinking. But then I started to really think about that a little bit more, and really think about my own experience and what does it look like from a theological perspective, all these different things. And I started to realize that maybe we're not as logical as we think we are. And there's actually a lot of theories out there that would say that actually we're not as logical as we think we are. And sometimes we're just kind of driven by impulse or by habits or by irrational decisions. And I know that I myself can be pretty irrational sometimes, and maybe you can relate. Here's an example. So say you just purpose in your heart and you say logically, I'm not going to watch Netflix for however long, maybe it's a week-long period of time, right? And you say, I never get anything done around the house because I always come home and I just immediately sit in front of the TV and I just watch Netflix the whole time. So you're I'm not going to do that. For an entire week, I'm not going to do that. And instead, I'm going to focus on getting jobs done around the house, because that's what needs to be done. I haven't vacuumed in an entire year, right? So many good shows to watch. And so you're I'm just going to clean up. And you do. You do a really, really good job. For 2 days, you're just on fire. And you're man, the house has never looked so good. This is awesome. It's wonderful. Everything just looks beautiful. The house smells so fresh and clean when I come home. I never want this to end. I want it to just continue on, because wow, it just looks great. And I feel really good about that, right? And then one day you're scrolling through on day 2 and you see this Facebook ad that says that your favorite TV show is going to be leaving Netflix, right? And you're oh no, my TV show, right? And you're you freak out and you're I have to do something about that. I only have till January. And so then you go on this this kind of justification thing where you're maybe I could just watch 2 shows, just 2. I mean, the laundry is in the washing machine, right? And not only that, but the dishes need to be go through their complete cycle. And so I got time, just 2 episodes, I got time, right? And so you do that, you sit down and you watch 2 episodes, but then 8 hours later, you're still watching the same TV show, right? And you're just basically giving up all hope of even going to sleep. You're about to pull an all-nighter just through season 2. You're just going for it. But then you pause and you wonder, why did I do that? I was so strong mentally. I said I didn't want to do it, but then you did it anyway. Sometimes we're driven by impulse, right? Or maybe you can relate to this experience. One time, my wife and I, when we were in college, just like totally not like what college kids do, right? We had just like such a terrible diet, which is totally not like college kids. All those kids are healthy, right? They're doing so good, but not us. We defied the norm, and we were super like eating just like not good food, just junk food, okay? And what made it worse was that we were in Minneapolis, and all of this really good food was like right at our fingertips, right? And so we were like, oh, we don't have time to cook, but there's like a Thai food place down the street, or there's like a pizza place down the street, or, there's authentic Hispanic food. And we were like, this is the life, right? We're like loving it. But the problem with that was then we were like, man, I just don't feel very good, right? We're eating all this junk, and you're just like, we started to realize that, wow, our bodies are actually kind of just rejecting this a little bit. And so Caitlin, my wife, came up with this plan, and she was like, you know what we need to do? We just need to detox. We just need to get all of that stuff like out of our system, because we're going to feel a lot better if we detox. And so she was like looking up all these diets and things, and she found this diet called the Whole30. How many of you have heard of the Whole30? Is anybody? Well, there's a couple of people, right? Okay, so this is not like a sales pitch for the Whole30. In fact, it's probably better to like consider this a warning to stay away, to stay like far, far away from the Whole30, okay? This diet is a nightmare, because basically you have to give up sugar, you have to give up caffeine and milk and gluten and processed foods and all the things that like we really enjoy and we eat like on a daily basis, and we don't think about it, right? And you have to do that for 30 days. And not only do you have to like give that up for 30 days, but you can only eat whole and unprocessed foods, which doesn't always taste as good as like that processed sugar stuff, right? And so like, but the thing is that like there's all this inflammation and stuff going on, right? And so like you need to cut down on that processed food to detox your body. And so Caitlin's like, we're gonna do this. And I was like, I guess we're gonna do this, right? I really, really want to maintain my diet, but I guess we'll do it. So we're going along with this our first week, and it was just an absolute nightmare. Like I just started like craving all of the food that I'd eaten regularly, and started to realize like how much I really enjoyed and sometimes even like relied on caffeine and sugar as a way to get me through my school day, right? So I'm just like craving all this food, and I thought, well, if I eat protein, I heard that is supposed to like curb all those cravings, so I'll do that, but it's a lie. It doesn't actually help out, right? So I'm eating protein, just like suffering through the first week, and I remember going up to the cabinet and just kind of opening it and seeing what's in there. It's like nothing I can eat, so I close it and I walk away, and I come back a little bit later and I open it and there's nothing in there, but I'm craving things so much that I actually started kind of cheating a little bit, and I would grab like this jar of honey and just like tip it back and just like pour this honey into my mouth, because I didn't want to like be hungry or to crave anything anymore, right? But that was week 1, and we made it through. Whew. But now we're in week 2, right? And things just persist. In fact, in some ways it feels worse. And I go to my school just like I always did, right? And I sit in the cafeteria just like I've always done. And my friend sits across from me just like he has always done. And he puts his tray of food on the table. But today's a little different, because he has another tray in his hand. And he puts that tray on the table and he slides it towards me and he says, "Hey, Matt, hope your day's been going really well. I bought you lunch." And like, how nice, right? But not at this point in time, not right now, because on that plate was everything that I wanted, but everything I knew I wasn't supposed to have at that point, right? We're talking like chicken strips and like a Kit Kat bar and French fries and Mountain Dew, like everything that I wanted, and I was staring straight at the face of the enemy, right? And here was this moment where I had to pause and just think, am I going to turn my back on the Whole30 diet only 14 days in? Or am I going to like stand strong and maintain that like commitment that my wife Caitlin and I had made? What am I going to do? And so you'll be like proud of me though, I had this moment where I specifically thought, Matt, you don't need this. You can get by without it. You don't have to give in to this temptation. You are strong you are capable of like withstanding any sort of food temptation. It doesn't matter if it's free and you enjoy a good deal. You can get a good deal elsewhere at some other time, just 14 days. What you need to do is you need to just get up right now. You need to go to the library and get yourself away from all of this junk food. So I was like, that's what I'm going to do. And so I stood up from my chair. I put my jacket on. I zipped it up. I put my backpack on my back, slid the chair back into the table, grabbed my keys and my phone, tucked them in my back pockets, and grabbed the tray, took it with me to the library, ate the whole thing before I even left, right? Like why? Right? There was like 2 weeks of solid work just like flushed down the drain, just like kissing it goodbye, right? Why would I feel the need to do that? And what I wonder is like maybe you can relate to me in this. And maybe you also ask this question of why would we do those things when we purpose not to do? It's because the brain likes what's familiar, and junk food was just like super familiar to me in my example. And really what I was thinking about was how much I enjoyed that junk food, right? And how much I wanted to have it. And it was something that was just like on my mind all the time. And maybe you can relate to that idea that what is familiar to us actually starts to feel like so comfortable that sometimes it even starts to feel like our friend. And even though we purpose in our hearts not to do it, we do it anyway because that's what we've always done. And sometimes we just start to think about that thing or that situation in our life, and that's not helpful, not healthy for us, but we grow so accustomed to it that we just want it all the time. And sometimes we even like crave it. What's happening in this moment when we're facing things like that is that our brains are constantly evolving and they're creating new neural pathways. And so every time that we make a decision or we have a thought, neurons are firing up here and they fire in a certain direction that creates like a pathway of thought. And so then the next time we come up to it, it fires, it's more likely that it's going to fire in that exact same direction, and we're going to repeat that pattern in thought. And if we do it again and again and again, it starts to become a locked pattern in our minds. And that can be a really good thing when we're having good thoughts and when we are making good decisions, which create good neural pathways, right? Good decisions create good neural pathways. But then it can also be a really bad thing when we're not having like any control over what we think, or we're just allowing anything in, and then we start to create these pathways that lead to bad thoughts or even bad decisions that we just replicate again and again and again. In other words, there's this friction between good thoughts and bad thoughts, good self-talk and negative self-talk. And if we're being really, really perceptive, we'll start to notice the fact that most of life's battles are actually won or lost in the mind. Most of life's battles are won or lost in the mind. And I think that we know this to be true when we look at scriptures, because it says in Proverbs that as a person thinks in his heart, so is he. If we want to live a life in the fullness of what Christ offers us, then we need to pay attention to what's going on up here, because that's going to be what plays out in our lives. The book of Romans doesn't say that we should be transformed by the renewing of our behaviors. It's not just, I purpose in my heart, I'm not going to do this, and then we don't do it, right? It doesn't say that that's where we start. It says, be transformed by the renewing of your minds. Most of life's battles are won or lost in the mind, and that's why we shatter, we crush, we vanquish every pretension that sets itself up against the knowledge of God, and we take captive every thought and we make it obedient to Christ. In other words, we let God's truth be what renews our minds, recognizing that most of life's battles are won or lost in the mind. We're going to look at the Apostle Paul as our first example of this, and the way that he conquered the battlefield of the mind. So when he's writing this book that we're going to look at in Philippians, he's writing it to the church of Philippi, and he wants to be out in the city of Rome proclaiming the good news of Jesus Christ. He wants to be out in the streets doing what he feels like he's called to do, but instead he's in a prison cell, right? He doesn't want to be in that cell, but that's where he finds himself. And I think that it would be normal when we think about it and we really start to picture where Paul is at in this cell. I think that like anybody would feel like, man, my life is just kind of like going down the drain right now. God said he was going to be with me, said he was going to be for me, but then here I am in prison. I'm so discouraged. Would you pray for me? Like, would you like help me out? Or maybe he would even say like, Philippi, you should just like call it quits because obviously everything isn't working out the way that we thought it would. Like maybe that would be something that would be logical for Paul to think, and maybe we couldn't even like blame him if he were to say something like that. But that's not what we find in Philippians 4:8. Instead of him saying like everything is lost, everything is hopeless, you should just give it up. Instead, he offers this encouragement and he says, whatever is true, whatever is noble, whatever is right, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is admirable, if anything is excellent or praiseworthy, think about such things. Paul recognizes that most of life's battles are won or lost in the mind. And if we want to have victory in our lives, we need to focus on good things, the things of God. But it doesn't just need to happen when we're in a jam, when we need to be bailed out, when things aren't going the way that we planned. It needs to be something that is persistent. It needs to be something that we go to consistently, and we're allowing the Lord to shape our minds consistently. And why is that? It's because a thought which consistently enters your mind comes out in your life. Like we said before, Scripture lets us know that as a person thinks in his heart, so is he. And you can't have a positive life if you have a negative mind. Your thoughts matter so much. Your thoughts are constantly and consistently shaping you. And if you can't control what you think, you will never, ever control what you do. If you can't control what you think, you will never, ever be able to control what you do. It's kind of like having a garden that's overgrown. Right? It's kind of hard for the flowers and whatever else that you've planned to grow up in there to actually take root and have a chance because there's just all these weeds that are coming up and growing over them, right? And so what you want to grow can't really happen. James Allen puts it this way, and this is a direct quote from him. This is what he says. A person's mind may be likened to a garden, which may be intelligently cultivated or allowed to run wild. But whether cultivated or neglected, it must and will bring forth. If no useful seeds are put into it, then an abundance of useless weed seeds will fall therein and will continue to produce their kind. So you're always producing something, in other words. Right? You're always producing. It's either like weeds that grow because you've been careless in your mind and you've just kind of let it go wherever. And so as a result, these like things that you don't want have grown up, or it's useful seeds that are intentionally grown, that are intentionally cultivated. It's either good things or bad things. A thought which consistently enters your mind is going to come out into your life. And here's the bottom line in all of this thinking that most of life's battles are won or lost in the mind, or that the thought which consistently is in your mind comes out in your life. The bottom line to both of those points is that, man, our thoughts cause our feelings, which then cause our behaviors. Why is it that we make such unwise and irrational and sometimes immoral decisions? Sometimes I think it's accidental, right? Sometimes we just didn't know that what we were doing was not a good idea, but we do it anyway, and sometimes that is bound to happen. But other times it's because we're thinking about that thing which we know logically to be wrong, but we're thinking about it as a positive thing or not thinking about it as a problem at all, and then we feel like it's okay, it's not a big deal. And then as a result, we end up doing the thing which we logically know we shouldn't do. But we're not really working on our minds, or we're not really producing good things anyway, so that thing has the opportunity to develop. Because our thoughts cause our feelings, which then cause our behaviors. Let's take Jonah as a case example. I think that this will really help shed some light on this. Here's a person who grew up in Israel, and everyone around him believed, as fellow Israelites, that the city of Nineveh was this horrible and this wicked city that none of them deserved any grace, right? That God should just wipe them out, right? And that was like the Israelites thinking about this place. And certainly that like the city of Nineveh was actually not a very kind place when it came to the Israelites. In fact, it was just the opposite. They were pretty violent and ruthless when it came to that nation. But what we find is that Jonah is actually caught up in the context and his culture, and he's kind of thinking in similar ways. Let's just try to imagine this. Here's Jonah. Everyone else around him is saying, like, well, Nineveh is this horrible, wicked city. And so Jonah starts to think, you know what? God should just wipe Nineveh off the face of the earth. They're a horrible city. They don't deserve any grace at all, but God would never show them grace anyway. And that's his thought. And so then he starts to feel like maybe vengeful or maybe bitter or like having a lot of wrath or hatred for this city. But then, of course, we know what happens in the book of Jonah is that it says that, and so it was. The word of the Lord came to Jonah, the son of Amittai, and it said, arise, get up, and go to that city, that wicked city, Nineveh, because its wickedness has come up before me. God wanted the Ninevites to repent, but Jonah doesn't go. But we really can't blame him. He runs the other way. But when we really think about it, what we find is this person that isn't dwelling on things that are lovely and pure. And so he's just producing things that are bitter and vengeful. And so as a result of that, his behavior reflects those thoughts and those feelings, and he goes the other way because he doesn't actually think that Nineveh deserves any grace at all. The thought that consistently entered Jonah's mind became this feeling, and then it came out in his life because thoughts cause feelings, which cause behaviors. And we can experience this too. If we're always thinking about what's inappropriate or unkind, inconsiderate, uncaring, bitter, and deceitful, then we will reflect that in our lives with behavior that matches those thoughts and those feelings. But on the other hand, if we're always thinking about things that are true and noble and right and pure and lovely and admirable and excellent and praiseworthy, then we will start to reflect those things in our lives as the result of the behavior, as the result of the thoughts and feelings that we're always engaging. We are to consistently engage the Word of God and fill our minds with the things that are of God, to cultivate good seeds that are going to bring forth good fruit. In other words, to have good thoughts that lead to good behaviors because they're founded on the things of God, the truth that is only really through Christ Jesus. Psalms 119, 15 through 16 puts it this way when it says, I meditate on your precepts and consider your ways. I delight in your decrees. I will not neglect your word. And then similarly, Psalm 143, 5 says, I meditate on all your works and consider what your hands have done. So both passages display this work of the psalmist as a lover of God who spends time meditating on God's word. Like meditating on it, okay? And what this means is that there is some serious work that's being done and an amount of time that's spent not just rushing through and not just saying like, well, I'm just going to do it when I need it or I'm just getting this over with for the day, but it's actually investing in it, right? And allowing that to be what takes root and enters into your soul, because that's when it really starts to become life-changing. Letting it be a time that we spend with God and allowing God to shape us. It takes time, doesn't it? And it has to be persistent. It has to be consistently done. But we have to make sure that it's a priority. And why do we have to do this? It's because if we're not like super careful about what we're thinking about and being intentional about our thought life, then our minds just kind of start to wander. And sometimes it can be just like those weeds that we mentioned earlier, right? They just grow up and start to take over what we had originally intended. Because when we become lazy with our thoughts, it's pretty natural for us to not naturally wander toward truth. Just like when we don't tend our gardens, right? Like I said earlier. And we start to think about things that actually turn out to be pretty untrue and start to be kind of these lies that we just allow to fester And then before we know it, if we're not really careful, they can build up into these big strongholds in our lives. And these strongholds that then need to be shattered. And it's thoughts like, you're not good enough. You can never measure up. Who do you think you are? Why do you bother trying? Your life is hard. Nobody understands you. You're just going to be isolated forever. You can't go on at this pace. You'll never make it. Whatever it is, we start to allow these thoughts to impact us and have power over us. We need to take every thought captive and make it obedient to Christ, like we said earlier. Scientifically speaking, we need to create new neural pathways. But spiritually speaking, we need to let God's truth renew our minds. To say that we're not going to believe the lies, we're going to embrace the truth. Most of life's battles are won or lost in the mind. And the life that you have is a reflection of those thoughts that you are consistently thinking. But maybe you're here today and you would say, I have some strongholds in my life that I've allowed to build up. And I have a lot of work, I have a ton of work to do. Let's talk about that. There are ways that God can help us apply this to our lives. There is power that's in the name of Jesus, right? Like it says in Ephesians 4, God has given us this ability to put off our old selves, our former ways that we used to be tied to, and instead to put on our new selves that are found in Jesus Christ. But maybe today you have this neural pathway that needs to be rewired, or you have a mind that needs to be renewed, or you have a garden that just needs some attention. And what I want to say to you today is that you can't do that unless you're really willing to spend some time. So here's what I want you to do in our remaining time together. You'll notice in the seat in front of you, or if you're in the front row, should be right on your seat, a number of blank cards. And what I want you to do is I want you to take that card. You'll find some pens there as well. And I want you to take both of those things, and I want you to just write down whatever is going on in your life, whatever sort of lie the enemy has used against you, whatever sort of thing that you feel that you're held hostage to, this stronghold that you've allowed to build up in your life that's just holding you hostage. And what I want you to do is I want you to name that stronghold. It could be thoughts like, you're not good enough. After what you did, God could never use you. You're always going to struggle financially. Everybody in your family does. You're never going to get ahead. You're never going to be a blessing to anybody. You're always going to screw up. Everybody in your family battles with weight. You're always going to battle. It's just part of who you are. Identify whatever that is in your life. It could just be some sort of addiction or some sort of sin that just has overcome you. Take that, write it down on a piece of paper, and after you've done so, what I want you to do is bring your card forward. We've got some waste baskets up here on the right and left, and what I want you to do is just tear up that card, wad it up, do whatever you want with it, throw it in the trash, right? Those thoughts they're just like trash anyway, right? Those thoughts are just lies. They have no place in your life. So get rid of them. Do what you do with trash. Throw it away. And then what I want you to do is identify the truth. What truth in your life has God shown you that identifies, that will shatter that stronghold? I want you to come up to the front after you've thrown that card. Grab one of these cards that's sitting right here. Take it back to your seat and write down whatever that truth is. Whatever sort of thing that is in your life that God has impacted you with. Name it, write it down. Maybe it's something like, I'm not what I buy, or I'm not a hostage to my social media or my phone. I'm not a prisoner to that addiction. I have the power of Christ dwelling within me, and I can overcome that thing that has haunted me. God is for me. God is a great provider. He will meet all of my needs. I will be a blessing to others. Whatever it is, I want you to name that truth after you've thrown away the lie. Write it down. Think about it throughout this week. Put the card in your back pocket. Take it with you. confess it throughout this week and believe it. Maybe this is going to be your mantra for the year, where you just write it, you think it, you confess it, and you believe it. If you're a hostage to your fears, you lay awake at night wondering and worrying, what am I going to do? How am I going to change these things? Then you need to start with your mind. You're going to write it, you're going to think it, you're going to confess it until you believe it. And maybe this is your declaration. Maybe it's because of Christ. I'm not anxious about anything. I cast all my cares on God because he cares for me, and I have the peace of God dwelling in my heart that passes all understanding. Write it, think it, confess it until you believe it. Some of you have come already. Bring up your lie, throw it in the trash.